Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking night fishing for bass. From the beginner basics, how to night fish, all the way up to some of our most advanced tricks that we use to consistently catch bass at night. As we get into the hottest days of the year, night fishing becomes a really viable option. It's just easier to do. It is a lot easier on us as the angler to go out at night and fish rather than being out in the daytime and just baking in the sun. Now, you don't see Tim and I doing a lot of night fishing on the channel simply because it's very, very hard to film. But night fishing is a part of our arsenal, and it's something we've done, I hate to say for decades, but for multiple decades. Night fishing is incredibly effective. It's not just easier on you, it's also easier on the bass. During the hottest part of the year, bass sometimes are just struggling to stay alive in that hot water. So it's easier for them to feed at night when things cool off as well. It's cooler, obviously, but they can also use the shadows to their advantage. They can hunt more effectively. They're more accurate. They hit their target more often because their target doesn't see them coming. And they're just able to eat more without so much effort during that hot part of the year. So if you have never been night fishing, it's definitely something you want to consider this time of year. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the basics of night fishing, give you some of the things we've learned along the way, run you through a bunch of the baits that we use, but just give you some of those tips, those little bits and pieces that have taken decades for us to learn and to fine tune that will make a huge difference for you if you decide to go out in the dark and try to catch a fish. So I've got the baits broken into three categories. We've got bottom contact baits, reaction baits, and topwater, because those are the big three. From there though, let's back up. First things first, if you're going to go out night fishing, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about. Number one is get a good headlamp. Some sort of flashlight. You can use the flashlight on your phone, but it will drive you crazy. You can use a handheld flashlight that you've left laying in the boat, but that will also drive you crazy. If you get a good headlamp so you can just reach up and turn it on, turn it off. When you hook a big fish and you're in the middle of the chaos, you don't want to be scrambling for a light so you can see what's going on. If you can just reach up and turn a light on, it makes all the difference in the world. So if you're going to start night fishing, a good headlamp is a must. Now, one thing to consider is that during the darker part of the month, that headlamp is a lot more important than during the brighter part. So most people in the summertime fish around the full moon. Traditionally, that's what you're supposed to do. Half of me completely agrees with that, and the other half thinks that's absolutely wrong, and I'll explain that. So depending on the fishery that you are on, depending on your lake, fishing the full moon can be great or it can be a horrible mistake. I'm going to give you a general rule of thumb that is going to make your life so much easier. Before we even get into baits, here it is. If you are going out night fishing and your lake is murky, so you don't have a lot of visibility, let's say less than 3 feet of clarity in the water. So if you're out in the daylight and you look in the water, can you see more than 3 feet deep? If you can't, fishing the brighter half of the month, so the full moon half of the month, will tend to be more effective than fishing the darker half. If your lake is clear, you are way better off fishing the new moon. Let me say that again. If your water is clear, take everything that you've ever been told, throw it away, focus all your attention to fishing around the new moon. The reason why is that if your water is crystal clear and you've got a bright moon overhead, it's not much different than daylight. The bait fish still see the bass coming. So in those clear water situations, the bass tend to be really active the darker the night. But in a lake where the water is murky, where there's not a lot of visibility, that extra little bit of light at night helps them. So they tend to hunt on that brighter moon, okay? So take that for what it is and start fishing the correct half of the month for your fishery, and you will immediately see a huge difference. Now from there, let's jump into the baits. And I'll just give you some more tips as we go. But bottom contact baits, essentially, there are 2 baits that I recommend you have with you, whether you are brand new or whether you've been fishing a place forever. Now, there will be people in the comments who completely disagree, but the 2 baits that I think you need are a curly tail worm and a jig. Okay, so some form of a curly tail, a C-Mac, big old 15-inch worm, a power worm, a Zoom old monster, some version of a curly-tailed worm. And I recommend that you fish it on a Texas rig. I use a wide gap hook myself. Some people just prefer a longer worm hook. Skin hook that. And then you're going to up your line. It's Texas rigged, so you need a weight. That weight goes on top, but here's the part that's important. 2 things I recommend. 1, use a peg above that weight. If you want a little bit of sound, a little bit of knock, maybe move that peg up 1/2 inch or 1 inch. Don't go beyond that. Some people fish without a peg at all. So when the bait is falling in deep water, the weight goes ahead and then the worm slowly follows behind. That's great. But when you're night fishing, you are at a disadvantage. Your senses are messed up. It's really easy for you to lose contact, to not know what's going on with your bait, with your gear, with your boat. It'll be a little confusing, especially if you're new. So definitely peg your weight so that your gear is connected. You can feel that worm down there on the end of your line. Second tip, use at least a 1/2 ounce at a minimum. And again, the reason why is that I want you to be connected to your bait. I want you to have good contact to your bait, good contact to the bottom, so you're confident that you can feel it at all times. Sometimes at night, those fish are just gonna smash that thing. They're gonna hit it so hard, you don't even see it coming. But other nights, they're just gonna pick it up. That's it, just a subtle little pickup. And on those nights, if you don't have good contact, when that happens, you're going to second guess yourself. You're gonna think, well, maybe I just don't feel my worm. Maybe I should just reel a little bit, and they're gonna spit it out. If you're gonna go through the headache of not getting any sleep, going out in the dark, bumbling around, trying not to crash your boat, right? If you're gonna go through all that, don't miss your bite. So use a minimum of a 1/2 ounce. 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, whatever you wanna use. Like that guy there, that's a 1 ounce. But use a heavier weight so you've got good contact. The other bait is a jig. Okay, same deal. 1/2 ounce to 3/4 ounce jig. Choose one with a great big giant hook in it. Reason why? Because you can. When you're night fishing, the size of that hook is going to matter 0 to whether or not you get a bite. Boy, it is hot out here. It doesn't look like it. It's raining right behind me, but it is humid and muggy, and I am sweating. Man, I should be night fishing tonight. So 1/2 ounce to 3/4 ounce jig, huge hook, because it's not going to matter to the fish, but when you get that monster bite and you smash that hook set, you're just so much better off if you've hooked that big old largemouth on a great big gaff of a hook instead of a little hook that might bend out. So you can get away with it, so get away with it. Use a big hook. And like every video, down in the video description, I'm gonna link my favorite jig, favorite trailers, favorite colors, favorite worms, all that stuff for you, and I'll keep it really organized so it's simple for you. Now, why do I recommend that you tie on a jig and a worm? Very simple. Depending on the lake you are on, they're going to eat one or the other really well. And here's the kicker, it changes. Clear Lake, I guided on Clear Lake for a very long time. I couldn't tell you how many nights we've been out on the water there. It's in the hundreds. We have spent so much time out there at night. If I went out there tonight, I could not tell you which one they were going to eat. On any given night, it's one or the other. So I have both tied on, and the second I start getting bit on one, set the other one down and run with it. But when I come out a couple nights later, I'm gonna start right back over with both, because it might go the other way on that night. Now color, don't get too hung up on color. I use a lot of natural tones. Don't feel like you have to go buy all new, all black and blue baits to go out here and night fish. You don't. Oh, it's starting to rain. Hopefully it doesn't rain too hard. We'll see. We might have to call a timeout here in a minute, and I'll cut and start again. We'll see how bad it gets. But don't feel like you have to get all new baits, okay? I throw a lot of natural colors. I throw a lot of dark colors. Black, blue, Junebug, just straight up green pumpkin. Don't get too worried about it. The more stained the water, I tend to use those darker colors just so it's a little bit more solid of a profile, but especially in clear water, don't worry about it. Just go fishing. Now, there will be people that swear you need a lizard or a brush hog or a variety of other baits, and those other baits will absolutely catch fish. Anything you use in the daylight can work at night. But if I'm gonna narrow it right on down, one jig, one worm, try them both. You'll be good to go. Now, moving right along, let's talk reaction baits, okay? I've got 4 for you. And again, it's that same sort of thing where they're sort of interchangeable. First one is my favorite one, and that's the California swim jig. So a swim jig, but again, super heavy hook on it. Notice the color. That is by far my #1 night fishing color. Citrus shad, 3/4 ounce. By far my #1. But I throw crappie, I throw a lot of the like tactical shad, glimmer, a lot of those whiter colors or chartreuse colors, dirty shad. I pair it to a Kitech, which if you have followed along with us, you know that when I throw a swim jig, I do not recommend a Kitech in the daytime. That's because we want a really hard kicking bait that creates a lot of secondary movement. At night, I like a Kitech because I go slower, and I'm using a swim jig most of the time, just bumping it along the bottom. So I throw it out, I let it hit the bottom, and then a slow, steady retrieve is bumping along the bottom. That Kitech has a wide kick. It moves a lot of water with the tail, and it will kick at a very slow speed. So I can go really slow with it and just bump the bottom. And if I feel like I'm not on bottom, free spool, let it fall. As soon as it hits bottom, click it in, reel again. If I feel it break contact, free spool, hit bottom, engage it. That's how I fish that swim jig. So I like that slow, wide kick of a Kitech at night. That is by far my #1 reaction bait. #2 is a spinnerbait. And again, we could go down the rabbit hole. There are people that tell you if you're not throwing a black spinnerbait with a Colorado blade, you're wasting your time. I prefer a willow blade at night in most of the country. Only in the dirtiest water do I switch to a Colorado. I like the vibration that comes off a willow. I think it's the best match to mid-sized threadfin shad, which are what's in most of the country. I think that vibration pairs up really well day or night, and I get a lot of big bites on the spinnerbait. And again, don't worry too much about color. If you own a black one, throw a black one. If you own a white one, throw a white one. But here's the kicker, and I almost forgot to tell you with the swim jig. If you're on a new moon, if it's dark, jet black, starting to rain again. If it's jet black, you want to go with those more muted colors. So you'll see me get away from citrus shad and throw more of like bluegill tones, green pumpkin, just things that don't really stand out. If I'm fishing around the full moon, so that really bright night, I'll throw the brightest white blades, citrus shad, a bunch of chartreuse. Whites and chartreuses just shine for me on that big moon. I believe the reason why is that at night, if there's light penetrating in the water, the bait fish are lit up. They're their normal colors. So those bright, bold colors work really well. But if that moon goes away, if it's a jet black night, you're better off with muted tones because nothing is that bright or that bold naturally in the water. There's nothing bright white on a black night. So use those more muted tones. With that, we're gonna pause and get out of this rain. All right, I backed farther under the trees and it's let off just a little bit. So let's see if we can get through this. So that is color. 2 more baits in that reaction category. Gonna be a chatterbait and a deep diving crankbait. Now, not necessarily a giant deep diver, not necessarily a 10XD or an Azuma 25, you know, something like that, but something like a 6XD. Norman DD22. Those mid-size baits are where I put my time because you don't necessarily need to get down 25 feet. If you can typically, on most lakes, if you're bouncing in that 6 to 14 foot zone, you're in the wheelhouse of most of the fish. And then again, I lean towards those standard shad type colors, especially with a deep crank, because the deeper you get, the less logical, for lack of a better term, it is to have a bright chartreuse or a bright white. And then chatterbait, I lean to the chatterbait when I'm in shallower water. The chatterbait likes to ride a little bit higher in the column anyway. So if I'm a little bit deeper, swim jig, spinnerbait. If I'm a little bit shallower, swim jig, chatterbait. That chatterbait makes a ton of commotion. I fish it on just a steady retrieve with the occasional reel bump, and those fish just come and get it. Same rules apply with color. You got that brighter moon, focus on those bright, bold colors. If you get that darkness, new moon, focus in on black blues, green pumpkins, blue gills, more of those standard muted tones, and I think you'll do a lot better. Now the last category is topwater. It is by far the most fun category, and I just grabbed a sampling of baits here. I grabbed 4 for you, but the biggest things with topwater, so I went with a whopper plopper, the 130 size, so it's got a good full size number 2 hooks on it. The pompadour and the mega bass. Crawler style baits are awesome at night. And I grabbed a wake bait. And that could be this guy, a Buka wake bait. It could be a rat, but a standard build wake bait. The biggest things with topwater that I want you to keep in mind is that a bait that is straight retrieve is far better than a walking style bait. A walking style bait, you're just asking for misses. Those fish are pinning it to the surface, but they still can't see it as clearly as they can in the daylight under most situations. So a bait that will crawl coming through the water, it's easier for that fish to get under it and track it and make an accurate shot on that bait. Same thing with a wake bait. It's a great big V in the water. See a huge V rolling out behind that bait. Whether it's a wake or a rat, does not matter. It'll push a big V. It's a full-bodied bait. When they're looking up at it, they can see it clear as a bell. And they, again, are very accurate when they can see that profile. Same thing with the whopper plopper. That whopper plopper is putting out a ton of ruckus, running in a straight line. The farthest back thing on that bait is a hook. It's hard for them to miss. Most of my topwater at night is treble hook baits. I would say the only exception to that would be a buzz bait. If you've got a lot of grass, say you're pond fishing, and we could make this real easy. If you're a pond guy, you're basically talking about a curly tail worm. You're talking about either a chatterbait or a swim jig, and you're talking about a wake bait and a buzz bait. Just call it a day right there. Well, call it a night right there. But for the guys that are fishing lakes, whether it's a grassy lake or not, with topwater, you're staying over the top of it. Only use the buzz bait if you have to. I prefer treble hooks because they're just more likely to get hooked up. Now, when you get them in the boat, obviously that's a fish in the dark with treble hooks. It can be a little bit of a mess. So I do recommend some long-handled pliers to help yourself out of those situations. One other rule of thumb, again, we're talking beginner and advanced, just a tip that we have learned from personal disasters. I recommend a lot of big hooks when you fish at night, right? Heavy wire hooks, heavy wire gear. I fish a lot of straight braid, some braid to leader, but a lot of heavy gear, heavy hooks. Never go night fishing with a hook that is stronger than the tools you have to cut it with. Make sure, if you want to go out, I don't even know what's in this boat. No major cutters right now. If you want to go out with big hooks at night, you make sure you've got a big set of wire snips to cut that thing. Because if somebody gets hooked bad, the worst thing that can happen is you not have the ability to get it out. So never fish at night. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb for the day too. Never fish with a hook that you don't have the ability to cut if you get in a bad situation, but especially at night. So that's the rundown on the baits. And again, in the video description, I'll link you the exact models, my favorite models, the exact weight, favorite colors. And I'll give you like 1 or 2 bright colors and a dark color for every single one where it applies. For your bottom contact baits, I don't throw bright, like I don't throw bright worms or bright jigs on the bottom, but I do sometimes throw really dark. Sometimes I throw natural. That big moon, I tend to throw natural. Dark moon, I tend to throw those bold colors. So no bright stuff, bottom contact, but sometimes natural, sometimes those dark colors because they are bold on their own. The profile stands out, that's bold. But for the rest of them, sometimes natural, sometimes really bright and bold, and I'll link all that in the description. Night fishing is not complicated. You just want to know when you go out there, one, the fish tend to be more aggressive. You're probably going to have a great time, but they rarely correlate to your daytime fish. So say you were catching fish on this wall right here in the daylight, your nighttime fish might be a 1/4 mile away. It's rare that the fish feed both, feed in the day and feed at night during the same time period. They tend to be 2 different groups of fish that are set up a little differently. So if you get out there, start fishing your normal good stuff and it's not working, don't let that get you down. Go fish new stuff. And then the other thing you don't want to fall for is if you find them and you're on big ones in a spot where you've never been catching fish, don't think that you can come back there in a daytime tournament and catch those fish. Those are night fish. They will vanish on you and you will not catch them in the daylight. It rarely correlates. So go out there, have fun. Know that you're going to be a little discombobulated. You're going to put some casts in the trees. You're going to miss the bank by 30 feet because you think it's way closer than it really is. That stuff is just going to happen. Laugh about it, have fun. I did mention that I fish a lot of braid to leader. I'll link you a couple of really strong combos. One of my favorite all-around night rods, maybe a budget combo too. But I fish a lot of straight braid at night. 65-pound braid is my main gig because I can get away with it. When you hook a monster bass and he's on a huge hook tied to 65-pound rope tied to you, you're in good shape. You're in way better shape than if it was daytime, you hooked him on a little treble hook on 10 or 12-pound line, right? So enjoy it. The only exception is, and it really doesn't even apply this time of year, as it gets colder going through the fall and the winter, we night fish then too. And when you get really cold, your speed slows down. I add a leader because when a fish picks up, say, a worm on braided line, and you pull tight, your reaction time is slow. That braid, the sensitivity works both ways. They feel you just like you feel them. And if your reaction time is slow, they'll spit it out before you can react. But I find that if I put a leader in there, they pick it up on a heavy mono or a fluoro, they'll tend to hold on to it a little bit longer than on that braid. I don't think they feel me quite as soon, and I can get a better hook set on them. But again, that really only applies later in the year. Summertime, just go out there and have fun. You can catch a lot of really big fish this time of year. It doesn't take a lot of new gear. I'll link my favorites for you anyway. If you guys enjoyed this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.